Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Mina B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the Siblinghood Theory. And this show explores the themes of belonging, conflict, and the relational patterns shaping your life. Let's dive in. So, everyone's online talking about family estrangement, but almost no one's talking about the grief, the ambivalence, even the cost of it. Social media flattens this into empowerment content or generational debate, but the reality is so much more messier than that. So today, we're going to get into what estrangement actually is, why people choose it, and what a 60-second video on Instagram can't tell you. Before we get deeper into this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to this show so that you don't miss any of the episodes that go live on Tuesday. And I do want to share that I am currently overcoming a mild cold. So I feel like I sound weird. I hope I don't. But in case I do, you know why. So let's start here with what is driving the conversation around estrangement because family estrangement isn't new. People have been cutting off family members for as long as families have existed. But what is new is how visible it's become. And there are a few things driving that visibility. First, there's been a massive cultural shift around how we talk about family. For a long time, the message was clear: family is everything, blood is thicker than water. You forgive your family members no matter what they do. But over the last decade, we've started having more honest conversations about things related to abuse, trauma, emotional incest, and boundaries. And we're naming things that used to stay hidden and swept under the rug. And that's created space for people to say, actually, my family wasn't safe for me. Second, the pandemic forced a lot of reckonings. When people couldn't avoid their families, when they were stuck in homes with dysfunction they used to escape by leaving, it became impossible to ignore. Some people came out of that period realizing they needed serious distance, and social media became the place where they could finally talk about it. Third, platforms like TikTok and Instagram changed the game. What used to be private shame is now shared openly. People are posting about going no contact with their parents or their siblings, and they're explaining why they don't speak to their walking through the decision to estrange. And for a lot of people watching, it's the first time they've heard someone put words to their own experience, and that validation can be powerful. But here is where it gets a little complicated. Social media rewards visibility, not nuance. A 60-second video about cutting off your toxic mother is going to get views. However, a 10-minute reflection on the grief, ambivalence, and the cost of that decision, well, that is a little harder to package. So, what we're seeing is a flattened version of something that is deeply complex. And that flattening has created a pretty intense polarization around this topic. On one side, you have people who see the estrangement conversation as long overdue. They're saying finally people can admit that their family hurt them without being told to just forgive and move on. For folks in this camp, the visibility feels like progress. It's destigmatizing a decision that used to come with enormous shame. And for people who have estranged from abusive or harmful family members, seeing others talk openly about it can be deeply validating. On the other side, however, you have people who see this as evidence that younger generations give up too easily. They're worried that estrangement is being treated like a trend, like something you do when a relationship gets hard instead of doing the work to repair it. They're concerned that social media is encouraging people to cut off family over conflicts that could be resolved with better communication or therapy. And here's the thing: both sides are responding to something real. There are people who needed to estrange for their safety and well being, And the cultural permission to do that without shame is important. But there are also people treating estrangement like a first option instead of a last resort, influenced by content that makes it look easier or more empowering than it actually is. What both camps are missing, however, is this: estrangement is not a one size fits all decision. For some people, it's absolutely necessary. For others, it might not be. And the online conversation often erases that complexity. It turns a deeply personal, context dependent decision into a debate about whether estrangement is good or bad, when the reality is it's neither. It's just what some people need to survive. So let's get clear on what we're actually talking about when we say estrangement. Estrangement is the intentional, sustained cutoff of a relationship with a family member. It's not taking space after a fight. It's not going low contact because someone's exhausting to be around. It's a deliberate decision to end the relationship, usually after years of trying to make it work and realizing it can't. And there are different levels to this. Low contact means you limit interaction. Maybe you see this family member during the holidays, but you don't call them regularly. No contact, however, means you've stopped initiating or responding, but the door isn't necessarily locked forever. Full estrangement means the relationship is over. You're not in touch, you're not planning to be, and you've made peace with the finality. Estrangement is also different from setting a boundary because a boundary is something like, I won't discuss politics with you, or I need you to call before coming over to my house unexpectedly. Those are limits you set to protect yourself while staying in relationship. Estrangement is what happens when boundaries don't work, when the person repeatedly violates them, when the harm continues, and when staying connected costs more than leaving. It's important to understand that estrangement isn't impulsive. I think this is the key thing. A lot of people think somebody woke up one day, they were sitting down eating their breakfast, and while they were snacking on their pancakes, they were like, you know what? I think I'm just going to decide to cut my mother off today. No, it doesn't work like that. Most people who estrange have tried everything else first. They've set boundaries. They are spending every moment in therapy talking about this particular person and learning skills on how to navigate the difficult relationship they have with this person. They have probably given these people second chances, third chances, and even 10th chances. Estrangement is what you choose when none of that works and staying in the relationship is no longer safe, physically, emotionally, or psychologically. So, quick pause. If what I'm saying is resonating, send this to someone who's navigating their own family dynamics. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in the complexity makes all the difference. So, before we get into why people choose estrangement, we need to talk about two fundamental human needs that are often at the root of this decision: belonging and the ability to navigate conflict. Let's start with belonging. According to research, the need to belong is one of the most powerful and pervasive human motivations. Studies show that the lack of belongingness is linked to significant decrements in health, adjustment, and well being. This isn't just about feeling connected, it is a fundamental psychological need like food and safety. But here's what most people don't talk about: belonging has a shadow side. And that shadow side is exclusion, especially when it's chronic and comes from your own family. That is a form of emotional neglect. When you're excluded by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, when you're left out of conversations, dismissed when you speak, treated like you're invisible or like your presence doesn't matter, your nervous system registers that as a threat. Research shows that social exclusion activates the same brain regions as physical pain. So, this isn't just about hurt feelings, it's neurobiological trauma. Dr. Jonas Webb's work on emotionally neglectful families talks about exclusionary families, families where certain members are systemically left out, ignored, or treated as less important. This exclusion doesn't have to be dramatic, it can be subtle. Maybe you're never asked for your opinion. Maybe your accomplishments Maybe your accomplishments are downplayed while your siblings are celebrated. Maybe when you're upset, no one notices or even cares. And over time, that chronic exclusion teaches you that you don't belong, even though you're physically present. And when your family is the source of that exclusion, when the people who are supposed to provide belonging are the ones withholding it, estrangement often becomes a way of protecting yourself from ongoing emotional neglect. You're not walking away from belonging, you're walking away from a system that made you feel like you never had it in the first place. The second piece is conflict. In healthy relationships, conflict doesn't threaten belonging. You can disagree, express hurt, set boundaries, and the relationship survives. But in families where estrangement becomes necessary, conflict usually meant rupture without repair. So every time you try to address harm, you were met with defensiveness, the silent treatment, gaslighting, or punishment. You learned that speaking up didn't lead to resolution, it led to more exclusion. So you had two impossible choices: suppress your needs to maintain fragile connection, or speak up and risk losing what little belonging you had. For a lot of people, estrangement is what happens when both options become unbearable. It's choosing to step away from a system that was hurting you rather than continuing to fight for belonging in a place where it was never truly available. So, why do people make this decision? What actually drives someone to cut off a parent, a sibling, a family member they've known their entire life? The most common reason is repeated harm and abuse without change. This could be emotional abuse, physical abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, patterns that don't stop no matter how many times you address them. You've named the behavior, you've asked for it to change, you've set boundaries around that the person either can't or won't do the work to make the relationship safe for you. And here's something important to understand. When we talk about abuse, we're not just talking about big, obvious trauma. We're also talking about what psychologists call little t traumas. I talked about this in episode 59, where I broke down how little t traumas show up in friendships. In the mental health field, we sometimes call this death by 1,000 paper cuts. And let me explain what that means. This is a scenario that I always give my clients. If you get one paper cut on your index finger, it's an ouch moment. You feel it, but it's not going to cause you severe harm. You get a second paper cut, even a third, you're still probably fine. But if you were to have 1,000 paper cuts on your index finger, at some point you're going to see a lot of blood. And all of those paper cuts are also going to impact the mobility of your finger. You can't use it the way you used to. That's what little t traumas do in relationships. Things like name calling, paper cut, being belittled, paper cut, the silent treatment, paper cut, dismissive comments, constant criticism. None of these might feel catastrophic on their own, but when they happen over and over and over again, they add up. And at some point, the cumulative damage makes it impossible to function in that relationship. The 1,000 paper cuts have done their damage, even if each one seems small at the moment. Another reason people estrange is emotional or physical safety. Some people cut off contact because staying connected means staying in danger. This could be a parent who's still abusive, a sibling who's volatile, a family member whose presence destabilizes your mental health, when the relationship actively threatens your well being, distance isn't optional, it is survival. Exhaustion is also a huge factor. Trying to maintain a relationship with someone who can't show up for you in healthy ways is draining. You're constantly managing their emotions, anticipating their reactions, protecting yourself from their behavior, and at some point, you just don't have that energy anymore. You realize that the relationship takes more from you than it gives, and you can't keep pouring into something that doesn't reciprocate. And sometimes people are strange because they finally recognize that the relationship causes more harm than good. Even if there's no active abuse, even if the person isn't intentionally cruel, the dynamic itself is damaging. Maybe it's a parent who constantly criticizes you, a sibling who is always in competition with you or is emotionally immature and dismisses your feelings or plays the victim, a family member who refuses to respect your boundaries. The harm might be subtle, but it's chronic, and estrangement becomes the only way to stop the cycle. What's important to understand is that estrangement is almost never about one incident. It's the culmination of years of pain, unmet needs, and relational ruptures that never got repaired. It's a last resort, not a first reaction. So now that we've talked about what estrangement is and why people choose it, let's talk about what the social media conversation is leaving out. Because as much as the visibility has helped, there's a lot that gets lost when you try to condense this kind of decision into a 60-second video. A lot of us don't have the attention span on social media to really sit and sort through the complexity of certain conversations. And when it comes to estrangement, there's not much information you're going to get by watching a TikTok video. So, the first thing I need you to understand is the grief involved in estrangement. Even when estrangement is the right decision, even when it's necessary for your safety and well being, it still hurts. You're not just losing a relationship, you're grieving the relationship you needed and never got. That is one of the ultimate things I'm constantly holding my clients with. The grief that comes with having a mom who couldn't love you the way you needed to be loved, having a father who is outside taking care of other children but never took care of you. You're mourning the parent who couldn't show up for you, the sibling who chose dysfunction over connection with you, the family you wished you had. And that grief doesn't go away just because the decision was right. The online conversation often frames estrangement as empowering or liberating, and sometimes it is. But it's also a loss, and both things can be true at the same time. Second, the ambivalence. Estrangement is really black and white. You can know intellectually that cutting off contact was the only option and still feel guilty about it and still feel sad about it. You can be certain the relationship was abusive and still miss the person. You can feel relief and sadness in the same breath. Social media doesn't hold complexity well, it rewards certainty. But real estrangement is full of contradictions, and that is something we need to acknowledge. Third, it's the cost. Estranging from a family member doesn't just affect that one relationship. It affects holidays, family gatherings, your relationship with other family members who don't understand your decision. If you cut off a parent, your siblings might take sides. If you estrange from a sibling, you might lose access to nieces and nephews. The ripple effects are real and they're not always talked about in the online conversation. And finally, what's missing is the recognition that this decision isn't prescriptive. What's right for one person isn't right for another. Some people need full estrangement to heal. Others find that low contact actually works better for them. Some people estrange and eventually reconnect under different terms. There's no one size fits all answer, and the discourse often makes it seem like there is. So, if you're someone who's considering estrangement, or if you're trying to make sense of your own family dynamics, here's how I encourage you to think about it. First, this is not a decision to make lightly or because social media content validates it. The visibility is helpful. It can show you that you're not alone, that other people have made this choice and survived it. But validation from strangers online isn't enough of a reason to cut off a family member. This decision needs to come from you, from your own clarity about what you need to be safe and whole. Second, therapy can help you see more clearly. A good therapist can help you distinguish between a relationship that needs boundaries and a relationship that probably does need to come to an end. They can help you process the grief, navigate the ambivalence, and figure out what's actually best for you. Not what looks empowering on social media, but what serves your long term goals and your mental health and well being. Third, you can love someone and still choose distance. Estrangement doesn't mean you hate the person. It doesn't mean you're vindictive or unforgiving. It means you've recognized that staying connected to them costs you more than you can afford to give. And choosing yourself in that situation isn't selfish, it's self preservation. Fourth, it's okay to grieve what you needed and didn't get. Even if you're estranged, even if it was the right call, you're allowed to be sad about it. You most likely will still be sad about it. You're allowed to wish things were different. Grief and relief can coexist. You don't have to feel only one way about this decision. And finally, give yourself permission to reassess. Estrangement doesn't have to be permanent if you don't want it to be. Some people estrange and never look back. Others estrange and eventually reconnect under different terms. There's no rule that says you have to commit to this decision forever. You get to decide what works for you as you grow and as circumstances change. Estrangement isn't a trend. It's not empowerment content. It's not something you do because a TikTok video made it look easy or because someone on Instagram said your family is toxic. For the people who choose it, estrangement is often the last option after years of trying. It's a grief filled, deeply personal decision that comes with real costs, and it deserves more gravity than a 60-second video can hold online. If you're watching the online conversation about estrangement and feeling confused, that's understandable. The discourse is messy because the reality is messy. There's no clean narrative here, just people trying to figure out how to protect themselves while also carrying the weight of what they've lost. And if you're someone who's estranged or considering it, know this: your decision is yours to make, not your family's, not the internet's, not anyone else's. You get to decide what you can tolerate, what you need to heal, and what kind of relationships you're willing to stay in. That's not giving up, that's choosing your mental health and your peace. So if this episode resonated with you, please rate and subscribe to the show. It helps more people find these conversations. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things, on Substack, where I go deeper into these topics. And if you haven't yet, please order a copy of my book, Owning Our Struggles, wherever books are sold. All of the links to stay in touch will be attached in the show notes. And here's one thing I want you to remember from today's episode: estrangement is not a failure, it's not a trend. For some people, it's the boundary that finally protects them. Until next time.